when the sunlight fades away and darkness begins to devour the last sounds of a long day. That is when the real stories begin. Welcome to Creepy Night Narratives. I am your guide for tonight. Double check your windows, pull your blanket up high, and pray that, as the rustling sound you just heard behind you is only the wind. Shall we begin? Imagine bringing a beautiful wooden table into your home, only to realize the grain of the wood is shifting into the faces of the dead. In my culture, nature isn't just scenery, it's a sanctuary for souls that have been here for centuries. This is the story of Kwong, a man of cold logic and steel chainsaws, who committed the ultimate taboo. He desecrated a mass grave and cut down a sacred sentient tree without a prayer. He thought he was just clearing land. He didn't know he was inviting 20 restless spirits to dine at his table, breathe in his house, and eventually speak through the mouth of his own newborn son. If you think karma is a suggestion, let this be your warning. Welcome to the law of the Yin world, where the debt of the father is paid in the blood and bones of the family. This world exists and operates in a delicate balance between two parallel, opposing, and complementary forces, white and black, good and evil, science and spirituality, the yang, the living, and the yin, the dead. Though separate, they heavily compensate for each other. Sometimes they exist in the exact same space and time, yet remain difficult to connect. For civilized people who live by materialism, they might set aside spiritual beliefs, but they still respect the beliefs of others. However, there are those who not only disbelieve, but also look down upon, or even blaspheme, the beliefs belonging to idealism. Today, we have a story related to this exact issue, titled The Law of the Yin World. The story revolves around a man named Kwong, around 38 years old, who had a wife nearly 10 years his junior, named Tam. He made a living working on local municipal construction projects. Due to years of working under the harsh sun and rain, he looked much older than his actual age. People meeting him for the first time never called him brother, defaulting instead to uncle or mister. His life was utterly ordinary, but he was a hard-working man. One day, Mr. Kwong was assigned as the project leader to clear a vacant plot of land, which happened to be an old cemetery, standing on a high mound of earth. Mr. Kwong gazed out over the vast area filled with ancient, massive trees. These trees had stood there for centuries, their trunks so wide it would take 3 people to embrace them. They grew intertwined with overgrown, forgotten graves. Suddenly, a voice called out, "Uncle Kwong, why are you standing up there?" It was Sun, a man in his early 20s who worked in Kwong's tree-cutting crew. Kwong replied sternly, "I'm estimating how many trees we can cut today. It'll probably take a few days." Sun wasn't asking about the work. "No, I'm asking why you're standing on top of someone's grave." Startled, Kwong looked down. "Oh, really, goodness, with dirt piled up like this. Who could tell?" Sun pointed to the memorial tablet right behind Kwong. Because he hadn't looked closely, Kwong had assumed it was just a mound of dirt. Sun immediately clasped his hands and bowed to the grave to apologize on Kwong's behalf. Ignoring him, Kwong shouted to the crew, "Let's take down the 2 biggest trees today, guys." The crew gathered around the 2 largest trees in the area. Looking up, one could feel the majestic, ancient aura of the trunks that had witnessed centuries go by. Their vast canopies shaded dozens of graves below. Just as they were bringing out the chainsaws, Kwong was hit by a severe stomachache. He told the crew to get started while he went to find a patch of tall grass to relieve himself. 10 minutes later, he returned to find everyone still hesitating, no one having made a single cut. Annoyed, he cursed at them. "Are you guys a bunch of headless snakes without me? You can't do anything right, you useless bunch." He aggressively yanked the cord of his chainsaw, but it wouldn't start. He cursed again. "Damn it, why is it broken now?" Suddenly, the roar of a chainsaw echoed. It was Sun's team. Seeing this, Kwong dropped his machine, snatched Sun's chainsaw, and barked, "Go fix mine. I'll handle this tree." Holding the heavy chainsaw, Kwong skillfully drove it into the trunk. Sawdust rained down, covering the nearby graves. His eyes burned with the fierce excitement of felling a giant. Finally, the massive tree groaned and crashed down, its branches thrashing together, sounding like heavy rain. Sun ran along the length of the fallen trunk to check for damage, only to stop dead in his tracks, clutching his head in horror. The heavy top of the tree had crashed directly onto a large tomb, completely shattering it. Kwong simply breathed a sigh of relief, lit a cigarette, and nonchalantly said, "Why are you standing there like a statue? It's just a tomb." Speechless, Sun could only clasp his hands, bowing repeatedly and muttering, "Please, we only do this to make a living. I beg the unseen spirits to forgive us." His shift done, Kwong casually headed home, leaving the crew to chop the trunk into smaller pieces and transport the wood to the warehouse. That evening, his wife, Tam, was waiting at the front door. She had prepared an aluminum basin with burning newspaper inside. Knowing her husband had spent the day cutting trees in a cemetery, she asked him to step over the fire before entering to burn away any lingering yin negative / ghostly energy. In Vietnam, we believe that when you walk among the dead, some of them try to follow you home. They cling to your clothes like invisible dust. That's why Tam prepared the purification fire to enter the house. Quong had to step over the flames, burning away the lingering spirits. But in his arrogance, he kicked the fire aside, and in that moment, the door wasn't just open for him. It was open for everything that followed him from the shadows. Hearing her explanation, Quong angrily kicked the basin away, scolding her for her foolish superstitions. Unable to persuade him, Tham quietly cleaned up the mess, not daring to talk back to her famously stubborn husband. Quong threw his broken chainsaw into the corner and sat down to eat, not even bothering to shower. He was in a foul mood about the broken tool, so Tam sat beside him in silence. Later that night, while Quong was asleep and Tam was washing dishes, a terrifying noise erupted. The broken chainsaw in the corner had turned on by itself. Tam screamed, waking Quong. Seeing the saw running, he yelled at her, "I told you to leave my stuff alone." Tam frantically denied touching it, swearing it turned on and off on its own. Quong checked the saw and brushed it off as a faulty switch, telling her to just finish the dishes. That night, Thumb couldn't sleep. She just stared at her husband. When Quong irritably asked what was wrong, she finally shared some good news. She was pregnant. Quong's grumpy demeanor instantly vanished. Having a child had been a long, difficult journey for them. Overjoyed, he treated her with newfound gentleness. With his spirits lifted, Quong became much more pleasant at work. However, young Sun lived in constant anxiety, secretly visiting the cemetery daily to apologize to the spirits, hoping they wouldn't punish Quong. Meanwhile, Tham stayed home to rest, but insisted on doing light chores to stay active. Slowly, a strange phenomenon began to occur. Tham started having frequent nightmares where she was paralyzed in her own bed. She would see blurry, gray-faced strangers standing in her house, staring intensely at her. She experienced severe sleep paralysis, her heart pounding, gasping for air. Knowing Kwong's hatred for ghost stories, she kept this to herself. One afternoon, Kwong brought home a beautiful wooden table so they wouldn't have to eat sitting on the floor anymore. While Kwong was assembling it, Tam felt unnaturally drowsy and went to nap. As she lay there, she drifted into a terrifying state. Her eyes were closed, but she could still hear Kwong hammering. Suddenly, she saw more spirits standing in the middle of the house than ever before. They were all glaring at Kwong. Tam felt like she was falling into an abyss. A crushing weight pressed onto her chest, suffocating her. She woke up, gasping violently. Kwong asked what was wrong, but she blamed it on pregnancy fatigue. When Kwong left for his afternoon shift, Tam secretly lit 3 incense sticks and prayed to the spirits. "I beg the unseen. We do not have an altar here. Please understand. This house has owners. Please visit and leave. Do not stay and cause chaos." Though there was no wind, the embers on the incense flared up erratically. By nightfall, Kwong hadn't returned. Tam checked her phone and saw several missed calls from Sun. Suddenly, frantic knocking echoed at the door. It was Sun, supporting a severely injured Kwong. Kwong's arm was heavily bandaged. He explained that while inspecting the site, he slipped and his arm was pulled into a steel-bending machine, crushing the bones and mangling his hand. Now bedridden, Kwong stayed home while the rainy season began. The constant rain made the house feel unnervingly cold and damp. The wooden table Kwong had bought began to show strange water stains. Tam realized with horror that the stains looked like a distorted, sagging human face. One afternoon, as Tam brought hot rice to the table, she jumped back in terror. The table was no longer displaying just one face. Dozens of warped, agonizing faces were crowded together on the wood. To prevent his wife from panicking further, Kwong threw a tablecloth over it. That stormy night, unable to hold it in anymore, Tham confessed everything to Kwong, the sleep paralysis, feeling invisible hands pulling her legs, and the horrifying faces on the table. She pleaded with him to tell her if he had offended the dead at the cemetery so they could offer a proper apology. Kwong stubbornly refused, arguing that the graves were going to be demolished for the project anyway. Suddenly, a violent gust of wind blew the windows open, whipping the tablecloth away. The faces on the wood had changed. They were no longer just agonizing. They were now scowling and furious, radiating a bone-chilling wrath. At dawn, Tam finally dragged a reluctant Kwong to the cemetery to apologize. They arrived to a shocking scene. Workers were currently exhuming the very tomb Kwong's tree had smashed. Looking down into the pit, everyone was horrified. It wasn't a single grave. It was a mass grave. Over 20 decomposing bodies were stacked and intertwined beneath the earth. Tham and Kwong quickly set up offerings of fruit and paper money. As Kwong walked around to plant the incense, he suddenly slipped on the mud. He tumbled directly into the open grave, landing heavily on top of the rotting corpses. Panic-stricken and with his arm in a cast, he thrashed wildly but couldn't stand up. To him, the exposed skulls seemed to be laughing maniacally at him. It took the workers a long time to haul him out. The workers, knowing Kwong had smashed the tomb, warned him, "When the dead are this angry, they will torment you until your family is destroyed." Terrified, Kwong promised to pay for the cremation and relocation of all the bodies to a temple to atone for his sins. Months passed. Tham gave birth to a baby boy named Nam, but due to her constant state of terror, the baby was born prematurely. Nam was tiny, fragile, and required expensive hospital care. Kwong's cast was finally removed, but his hand was permanently deformed and useless, reduced to doing odd, low-paying jobs. His finances plummeted. Worse still, baby Nam was notoriously difficult. He cried incessantly at night, showed bizarre aggression, and even bit his mother until she bled. Neighbors whispered that the child was Kwong's karmic retribution. One evening, a heavily intoxicated Kwong stumbled home. Looking at his toddler son, he pointed a finger and screamed, "You're not my son. Ever since you were born, I haven't been able to keep my head above water." Tham burst into tears, but baby Nam just sat dead still. He stared at Kwong, his eyes suddenly bloodshot. Then the toddler let out a furious, aggressive scream, as if he perfectly understood the insult. Kwong lunged at the boy in a drunken rage, but Tham shielded him. Late that night, Kwong woke up to use the bathroom. Half asleep, he stepped on a toy car and slipped. He fell hard, crashing down directly on his deformed arm, re-shattering the fragile bones. He screamed in agony. Tham woke up, turned on the lights, and saw a chilling sight. Kwong was writhing on the floor, while baby Nam was standing up, pointing into an empty corner of the room. The toddler's finger tracked something invisible moving across the room. Nam pointed at Tham and said, "Mum." He pointed at himself and said, "Nam." Then he pointed into the dark storage room and said in a strangely mature voice, "Nam. Make. Do." Terrified, Tham grabbed the baby and fled the house for the night. The next day, deciding the damp storage room was harboring dark entities, she cleaned it out. Inside, she found the old wooden table. The demonic faces had multiplied, their expressions twisted in excruciating pain. Realizing the wood was cursed, she frantically painted over the entire table to hide them. As Nam grew, he exhibited unnatural behavior. He didn't play with other children. Instead, he would sneakily brew tea and sip it like an old man, frequently holding conversations with thin air. On the night of a full moon, Kwong was passed out drunk again. Tam woke up from a restless sleep to a horrifying silhouette in the dark. Little Nam was standing over the bed, holding a heavy hammer high above his head. Before Tam could even scream, Nam brought the hammer down with brutal force directly onto Kwong's broken arm. The sickening crunch of bone echoed in the room. Kwong woke up shrieking in unimaginable pain. "Nam, what are you doing?" Tam screamed. Nam dropped the hammer and burst into hysterical tears. "I didn't do it, he did." The boy pointed frantically beside him. "This old man did it. He's standing right next to me." As Tam hugged her husband in terror, a deep, resonant chuckle echoed through the room. She looked up. Nam was now sitting in a dark corner. His eyes glowed eerily in the shadows. "I am not your child." A chilling, gravelly old man's voice spoke from the toddler's mouth. Kwong froze, the pain momentarily eclipsed by pure terror. The entity possessing their son sat with regal posture, stroking an imaginary beard with its left hand. It began to speak in rhythmic poetry. "A human life possesses 4 limbs. I shall break them all, leaving not a single one." The spirit then revealed a terrifying truth. "Before, your life was normal. I pushed you once, and your livelihood ended." Kwong gasped. He realized his factory accident wasn't a slip he vividly remembered, a dark shadow rushing him right before he fell into the machine. The entity continued its ominous chant. "Humans have 2 legs to walk, to step up and down, to know front and back. Live this life right, lest karma finds you, or I shall break both legs, leaving you to crawl." Realizing the spirit intended to cripple his legs next, Kwong and Tam fell to their knees, begging for their lives. "Sir, I know my husband smashed your tomb," Tam cried. "But we paid to move your remains to the temple. Please spare our family." A new voice emerged from the child this time, a soft, eerie woman's voice. "I do not reside deep in the graveyard dirt. You pray to them. It serves us no purpose. Ghosts hold grudges. Demons cast blame. All because an atheist violated the sacred grounds." Tam turned to Kwong. "Besides the tomb, what else did you do to offend the dead?" Trembling, Kwong confessed everything. He admitted that he stood directly on top of the memorial tablets, cursed at the dead, and even urinated in the cemetery because of his stomachache. The child laughed again, its voice shifting once more into a booming, furious tone. 100,000 sins, drawn and quartered. Bulging eyes, rotting mouth, a life of exile. Calamity strikes, organs shattered, tied and bound to the tree. Tam caught the word tree. She asked Kwong, "When you cut down those ancient trees, did you light incense and ask for permission?" Kwong looked utterly bewildered. "It's just a tree. Why would I need to pray to cut down a tree?" Nam slammed his hand on the table, roaring in absolute fury. "We cultivated our spirits on that tree since the dawn of man. You came without a word, without a sound. We care for nothing. We forgive nothing. An ignorant human commits a grave sin. Arrogance brings a life worse than a beast, sooner or later. We will saw your limbs, break your legs, leave you begging on the streets." Having delivered its final, terrifying verdict, baby Nam collapsed and fainted. Tam rushed to hold her son. Kwong sat paralyzed, staring at his permanently mangled arms, unable to speak. They later investigated the cemetery. While the graves were only a few decades old, the giant trees had stood there for centuries. Such ancient trees harbor immense spiritual energy, serving as homes for countless wandering souls. When the rest of the crew felt fear and prayed before cutting, they were spared. Kwong, who arrogantly desecrated the land and cut the tree without permission, drew the full wrath of the ancient spirits. The beautiful wooden table he brought home was crafted from the very tree he cut down. The warped faces on the wood were the angry spirits he had brought directly into his own home. That night finally broke Mr. Kwong's arrogance. Though his life remained difficult with 2 crippled arms, he learned a harsh lesson in humility and respect for the unseen world. Whether his legs would eventually be broken remained a mystery, heavily dependent on the sincerity of his ongoing repentance. As for baby Nam, thanks to his mother's accumulated good karma, he grew up safe, healthy, and exceptionally bright. Tam no longer had to live under her husband's oppressive materialism. She proudly set up altars for Buddha and the Earth God in their home, trusting in their divine protection. Thank you for walking with me to the very end of the darkness today. If these paranormal encounters have left you unsettled, or if you have witnessed something similar in the real world, please leave a comment and share your story. Every subscription is a candle that helps me shed light on the next mysterious shadows. But for now, be sure to lock your doors carefully before sleep. Goodbye, and I will see you in our next chilling footage.